All right, everybody, welcome to the stream. My channel name is College Football Frenzy. Back from our video finally, I guess you could say I'm back from the dead for after a couple of years of a hiatus. But I had a lot of work this fall. I tried to get on earlier, but I couldn't. Now I'm back. I did a couple streams a couple minutes ago, just that had a little bit of technical difficulty. So if you got notifications, I'm sorry about that. But I had to delete them afterwards. Anyway, I'm going to start off with New Year's Six bowl projections. It's going to be fairly simple, just talking about who's going to make the six bowls, why I think these teams will make the six bowls, who I think will be the conference champions, the simple stuff like that. I'll start with the playoff bowls, obviously the more entertaining ones, and I'll work my way down to the Rose, Sugar, Fiesta, and Peach to cap it all off. But I'm gonna get into it right away. Waste no time. So Orange Bowl, obvious here. Georgia's number one. They're going to be wanting to play in the Orange Bowl because Georgia is very close to Florida. So that's an obvious pick there. And obviously, as we all know, the number one team usually gets kind of a say in where they want to go. They don't. It's not a guarantee, but they can ask the committee. They can recommend the committee for a location. So Georgia will be number one, and I have them playing for Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame doesn't have a marquee win except for Wisconsin. If you want to call that a marquee win, you can. I still wouldn't consider that to be a great win yet because Wisconsin's probably going to finish as a four-loss team, 9-4 at best. I would say they could even lose this week. We don't know. So Wisconsin's not an incredible win. They did blow them out, but I still don't think it's the holy grail of wins like some of these other teams have. But at the same time, they're 11-1, and with the way things have been panning out this season, just staying alive, not losing multiple times, could be enough to get Notre Dame in. And I think in this case, with the way the Big 12 is situated right now, a couple of good teams playing each other Saturday, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, there's a potential that they play each other again the next week. And if they cancel each other out, there's going to be a good chance for Notre Dame to get in that playoff. So I have them at the 4 spot, and they have been playing pretty good football as of recently. Not against great teams, but when you beat down on Georgia Tech that hard, I do think it's worth something, especially when a team like Clemson, who was ranked, was struggling with them big time at home earlier in the season. So I think Notre Dame at 11-1 is going to have a crack at this playoff. They need some things to go their way, but I think if the Big 12 implodes and Alabama loses sort of convincingly, they should be in the top 4. And I have them playing against Georgia. Georgia would be the overwhelming favorite there. There's no doubt about that, though. And the Cotton Bowl, so the other playoff bowl. I have the Battle of Ohio. Very interesting matchup here. There's definitely a team that's going to be favored. We all know Ohio State clearly playing some of the best football in the nation right now. If they were undefeated, I think they would have a case to be over Georgia just because they have a better win right now. And on top of that, they're playing more dominant in my opinion. Their offense, when they're at their full potential, and I understand when they played Michigan State, that's the worst pass defense in the nation. I understand that. But their offense at full potential is very, very scary. It's scarier than any team in college football. As we know, they do have they have the best wide receiver core without a doubt in college football. I think you would probably say they have, yeah, I would say they have the best offense by far. And Alabama's up there, but I think there's a good argument to say it's clear way that Ohio State is the best offense. So I have them at 2 playing Cincinnati. They're cross-state rivals. They play each other every now and then. Most of the games have been pretty lopsided in recent history. We had in 2019, I believe that was 31-0 in favor of Ohio State. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but it was a beatdown on Ohio State's favor. And I think there are similar circumstances this time around. I think Ohio State is clearly the better team. I think they would win this game, but it is important that Cincinnati, I think, gets in the playoff if they're undefeated. Just with their resume of beating Notre Dame, I think that should get them into the playoff. So that's who I have as the 2 and 3 matchup. Ohio State would definitely be favored, but Cincinnati deserves a shot. Next game, the Rose Bowl. So Big Ten team versus Pac-12 team. For the Pac-12, I have Oregon. I understand Utah beat down on the Ducks pretty badly this past weekend, and one would assume that they're most likely going to play in a rematch in the conference championship game as long as Oregon can get their business done, the Civil War against Oregon State. One would assume Utah would be favored again. But I think the Ducks, with the talent they have, can stage a comeback. I think we started in 2019. They played really good football after losing to Arizona State. I see a similar scenario happening this time around. So I think the Ducks get it done. They avenge their second loss, and they go to play in the Rose Bowl versus Michigan. Now, if it was up to me because it's head to head, I would pick Michigan State. But with what we've seen the committee do, it's most likely going to be Michigan because it's obviously the highest ranked Big Ten team available. And we saw Michigan before Michigan State even lost to Ohio State this past week, and they were situated above Michigan State, even though they lost them. Even though they lost to Michigan State, they were situated above Michigan State because that bad Purdue loss. I think clearly the committee thinks Michigan is still the better team regardless of that game. So I'm going to put Michigan in the Rose Bowl against Oregon. I would probably favor the Ducks in this one, just because Michigan has such a history under Jim Harbaugh of choking these big games. It's kind of like Notre Dame, actually, kind of like Brian Kelly. They choke all the big games, but I definitely would expect a competitive matchup overall. Next up, I have the Sugar Bowl. So I don't have Alabama making the college football playoff if you haven't seen that yet. If they win against Georgia, they should absolutely be the number one team in the nation. There's no doubt about that in my mind. If they win against Georgia, they should be situated at number one. So I like to call them kind of an all or nothing team. They can either be one or they should be out completely of the college football playoff. I do not want an 11-2 Alabama who hasn't won the conference championship, whose best win is against Ole Miss, which it's a respectable W. Ole Miss is about to go 10-2. They're finishing up the Egg Bowl against Mississippi State, so I'll acknowledge it's a respectable win. But after that, they really don't have any other great wins, and they've been struggling against a lot of teams. We understand now that Florida wasn't a great football team. Miami, they blew out, but Miami's not a great football team. Florida State just beat Miami, so that's not a respectable win in my opinion. LSU came down to the very end. LSU had a chance to win, so I'm not impressed with that. And Arkansas is a ranked team, but they really did struggle in that game as well. So I have Alabama outside the college football playoff, maybe at 5 or 6, and I've been playing Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State, if they win out, should absolutely be in the college football playoff, kind of like Alabama. I think there's a case for them to be above a 13-0 Cincinnati. I imagine the committee would put a 12-1 conference champ over a Power 5 conference champ over an undefeated Cincinnati. So if they win out, there's no doubt about it. They should be in. They'll have a bunch of marquee wins. First one being Baylor, that's a big win, and they'll have two against, or they'll have another one against. They'll have one against Oklahoma, and they'll most likely get a second crack at Baylor. So they would have 3 maybe top 15 wins. So without a doubt, they should be in the playoff if they go undefeated. The question is, if they do go on, will they go undefeated? In my opinion, that won't be the case. I think if they play Baylor a second time, with the way Baylor's been playing as of recently, shutting down Oklahoma, I thought that was a very impressive win. Even though they had their folly against TCU, I think Baylor could avenge their loss earlier in the season and upset Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. And if Oklahoma State loses to Oklahoma, which would create a rematch in the Big 12 championship game, so it'd be 2 weeks in a row of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, that would eliminate them because they're a one-loss team right now. They're not going to get in if they have 2 losses, even if they're conference champ. And I do think there's a good chance that Oklahoma could eliminate Oklahoma State this weekend, just because Oklahoma, we've seen in the past with Lincoln Riley's teams, they look down. They're not playing their greatest football towards the end of the season, and they always manage to beat Oklahoma State. I think it's some weird voodoo, or you can call it what you want, but they just can never seem to get the job, or Oklahoma State can never seem to get the job done against Oklahoma. I do think this is the best Oklahoma State team we've seen since 2011 with Mike Gundy, and unlike 2011, this team actually has a good defense. It's one of the best defenses in college football. It's really their offense that's the problem, or more of the issue right now, but their defense is absolutely lights out. That being said, I have them finishing 11-2, so lose this week against Oklahoma, and then win the next week against Oklahoma. So back-to-back, they lose one, they win one. They're not in the playoff, but they get to play Alabama, the team ultimately in 2011, who they lost out on the second spot to. That was a big controversy. That's what kickstarted the college football playoff era. And I think that would be a fantastic matchup to see in the Sugar Bowl. I'd be very excited to see that. Alabama is just incredible offense with Bryce Young, the Heisman frontrunner, versus Oklahoma State's great defense. That would be, I think, a perfect matchup, and I would expect that to be very close. Peach Bowl, Ole Miss right now, they're finishing up against Mississippi State. As I said, they're going to be 10-2. I would imagine this is where they slot the Rebels. I think usually the SEC has a team in the Peach Bowl, or almost always. So it's a good space for the SEC. Ole Miss is clearly the third best team in their conference. Really, after Ole Miss, I don't think anybody you could put in a New Year's Six Bowl for the SEC. So Ole Miss is at the facto third team, in my opinion. And I think they get the Peach Bowl spot against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh would usually, if they were to win the ACC, they would usually go into the Orange Bowl. But since the Orange Bowl is being used for the playoff, it would probably be the Peach or Fiesta. And I think location-wise, the Peach Bowl makes a lot more sense for the Panthers. So they win the ACC at 11-2. I do think they're clearly the better team than Wake Forest. They definitely have one of the best offenses in all of college football. I've been very impressed with Kenny Pickett. So they win the ACC at 11-2. They play 10-2 Ole Miss. I would favor Ole Miss in that game. I think overall Ole Miss's better strength of competition will help them out in the end. I think Pitt, for all the great talent they have, hasn't really been tested, and I think that will hurt them at the end of the day. So I would favor Ole Miss. But regardless, I do think Pitt is definitely the clear front runner to win the ACC. And then finally, the Fiesta Bowl. This one's really a toss-up because usually you would have the group of 5 team going here. But since Cincinnati is making the playoff in my model, my projection, it's a little bit different. You don't have to put that group of 5 team in here. You could. I would love to see a 13-0 UTSA if they make it go into the playoff or go into the New Year's Six. But that's likely not going to happen. They're most likely going to play maybe in the Independence Bowl against BYU. Speaking of BYU, they would probably be one of the candidates to make this bowl game. It would be Baylor finishing. I have Baylor finishing at 10-2. You could have Oklahoma, who I also have finishing at 11-2. Michigan State 10-2, and then BYU's 10-2. Those would be the 4 candidates. And obviously, you're not going to put 2 Big 12 teams, so you would really have to narrow. So you would have to pick one of Baylor and Oklahoma to go in. In this scenario, if Oklahoma wins next week but loses the week after, I think with the way the committee has been treating the Sooners, and I'm not a fan of the disrespect to the Sooners. I understand they've had a couple close wins and they had a bad loss to Baylor, but they're still overall a one-loss team. So I respect them, but the committee clearly doesn't. So I think even if Oklahoma wins this week, a loss the next weekend would bump them below the Bears again. So I think Baylor is the Big 12 representative for the Peach Bowl. And the second slot, it's between Michigan State and BYU. Those would be your 2 teams. Michigan State's currently situated over BYU. BYU really doesn't have any ground to cover, or they can't cover any ground, right? Because they don't have a conference championship. They're an independent team. That's one of the costs of being an independent team. You don't get a conference championship. So in this scenario, I would imagine Michigan State would make the Fiesta Bowl to play Baylor. Plus, Baylor's already played BYU. So, usually the committee doesn't want a rematch in the New Year's Six bowl game. So it would most likely in that scenario, if they put Baylor in, they're going to want Michigan State in. So I have Baylor versus Michigan State as my Fiesta Bowl matchup. That's a rematch of the Cotton Bowl, I believe, in 2004. It was the 2014 season. So the 2015 Cotton Bowl. Baylor was up big early on. They were a team that nearly made the playoff that year. They finished at 5, but they were up big early on, and Michigan State stormed back and ended up winning that game, winning the first Cotton Bowl in the college football playoff era. But anyway, that is it. Those are my 6 New Year's Six Bowl projections. I'll say them again. Orange Bowl, number 1 versus number 4, Georgia versus Notre Dame. Cotton Bowl, number 2, Ohio State versus number 3, Cincinnati. The Rose Bowl, Michigan versus the Pac-12 champ, Oregon. The Sugar Bowl, Alabama versus the Big 12 champ, Oklahoma State. The Peach Bowl, Ole Miss versus the ACC champ, Pittsburgh. And the Fiesta Bowl, I have Baylor against Michigan State. Those would be my 6 bowl games. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And I'll get a little bit more professional and stuff like that. I'll try to make some better broadcasts as the time goes on, but I'm just getting back, so I'm testing things out. It's been a long time, but I appreciate you tuning in, and I'll have a great night.